Tomorrow night on NBN. Tonight we're counting down 20 Aussie scandals. From strange disappearances...
A great story.
The mood was one of total shock.
...to unlikely affairs.
I thought it was very sleazy.
I was pleased to know someone was having sex.
We've got outrageous sporting scandals.
It was a mistake to put her in that team.
It caused ructions.
And a jaw-dropping beauty.
My mouth just fell open.
What? Good evening and welcome to 20 to 1 Aussie Scandals. Tonight we're celebrating the events that grabbed our attention and divided the nation. These are water cooler moments. Did she do it? Is he guilty? Is it any of our business? Well, we start tonight with 3 young unemployed Australians in the middle of a whirlwind. A whirlwind that played havoc with their ponytails.
But I've had my hair half my life and I ain't getting rid of it.
Get a haircut and get a real job.
Remember the Paxtons? In 1996, a current affair did a story about long-term unemployment in Australia. They came across a Melbourne family called the Paxtons.
So, Shane, would it be worth cutting your hair?
No.
The Paxtons were sent from tabloid heaven. Now, if you were to have the stereotypical dull bludgers in the mind of the Australian and said to Central Casting, send us a family that looks like that, who will look down the barrel of the camera and say the most outrageous things that we can get some righteous rage over. Ding, ding. Hello? We're the Paxtons. And they pressed every button that Australia had.
12, get up.
The Paxton case demonstrated if you're not trying to get a job and if you're not prepared to take a job offer, then I don't think people can expect a lot of sympathy from the rest of the community.
The whole of the Paxton family was unemployed and they didn't seem to be in too much of a hurry to get a job.
It absolutely took the country by storm. It was by far the biggest rating show and story on a current affair that year.
You were either for the Paxtons or you were against them.
It looked to me like kicking a man when he's down, or kicking a whole family when they're down. And maybe they needed to be kicked.
After the story went to air, job offers flooded in. A current affair flew Mark, Shane and Bindi to South Mole Island on the Great Barrier Reef, where they were offered a chance to work in a tropical paradise by the resort manager.
These are the resumes that have turned up here for people that really want a job on South Mole Island. Tell me why I've got to be choosing you instead of choosing one of these people.
What's the deal with the haircut?
It's got to be a haircut. It's your decision and it's back in your court.
Well, thanks a lot for the chance. Sorry I couldn't accept.
So am I.
I would have loved to live on a holiday resort in Queensland. I was a stop-go man on Cessnock Council. Mate, I give the Paxtons the big of these ones.
I felt a little bit sorry for them because they almost became the scapegoat for every dull bludger across Australia.
While the Paxton boys played in paradise, Bindi embraced employment until she found out what she had to wear.
The colour's not right. I love purple.
I think Bindi went on to do Penthouse or something like that, and she had all purple props all around her, but no purple on, apparently.
Bindi's career as a nude model was short-lived, but Shane Paxton went on to make several guest appearances in court, where he was charged with dole fraud and for stealing shampoo. At number 19, we turn our attention to fashion. In 1965, the Polite Society of Australia was shocked out of its hats and gloves when a beautiful young British model stepped out at Melbourne's Derby Day.
Miss Jean Shrimpton's choice of racewear last week swamped the front pages of Australian newspapers with banner headlines. Many of the fashion leaders in Melbourne are still fuming.
I was most disappointed. Most disappointed indeed.
You think she should have worn a hat?
Oh, most definitely.
Jean Shrimpton wearing a miniskirt and no hat to the races is an outstanding moment in Australian fashion.
She was gorgeous. Gorgeous, yeah. No hat, no gloves.
If you remember photos of the time, there's all these women behind her with hats and gloves and handbags and stockings and heels and too much makeup and sunglasses, absolutely covered up, looking like the Queen Mother. And then here's this beautiful, slim girl with none of it on, no stockings, no hat, just owning the moment.
The Melbourne people were so shocked. I mean, it was, you're thinking, what century are we living in?
Well, you can see the jealousy on everybody's face because they're so stitched up and she's so sort of free.
This woman created the phenomenon of dressing like a skank at the races. But I think we have her to thank for the rich tradition of women going to the races dressed in a Chuck super wipe held together with a safety pin.
Well, by today's standards, Jean Shrimpton looked like a nun.
If you look at the very little girls wear today, you could say the shrimp was overdressed.
I think everyone's entitled to their own opinion. I wear what I like, they wear what they like.
Yeah, no, I'm glad she did it. I mean, Jean Shrimpton, who would tell Jean Shrimpton she's wrong?
And who would dare tell the Prime Minister's wife that she was wrong when Billy and Sonia McMahon visited the White House in 1971?
She's a very stylish woman. She had to slit up her dress because that was what she thought would look great. It just happened that the shot that they took was very revealing, whatever that meant.
Billy chose the dress. I'm sure Billy chose the dress for her. And of course, they hadn't seen anything like this before in the White House. It sure had a wow factor to it. I think Australia thought, well, see what we can do in Australia. Look at our Sonia.
And look at Sonia in 2005, wearing a replica of that dress at the Golden Globes and still turning heads. At number 18, the Athens Olympics, and elite rower Sally Robbins laid down mid-race and cost her teammates the chance of a medal.
I believe that I put in 110% and just didn't have the steam to bring it home.
She obviously gave it everything that she had, but I think that at the end of the race there probably could have been a bit more remorse.
Sally's apparent lack of remorse angered the Australian public and her teammates.
And it's just unfortunate. Trust we'd put into other people and the commitment that we'd shown each other didn't happen. The promises that we made to each other were broken.
I often wonder if I'd have been sitting in that boat, whether I would have just thrown her overboard and kept rowing.
I don't think people even do that at high school carnivals. Like, usually you finish, even if you come last.
Yep, the Australian women's rowing team up shit creek without a paddle.
Sally Robbins, lay down, Sally.
Lay down, Sally. I'm resting in my arms.
As soon as the cat fight began, the spin doctors stepped in and organised a press conference to calm troubled waters.
4 years of hard work, and it was the heat of the moment. We all did everything that we could.
Don't we love the fake press conference? Yeah, we're all getting on really, really well.
I admire you so much.
It was a mistake to put her in that team. She should never been in that 8. She wasn't good enough.
We've never seen it in the sport of rowing before. Over 100 years of Olympic competition, no one's ever laid down like that.
They work hard for probably, I don't know, but at least 4 years. They'd probably tell you they work hard for 14 years to lead up to this event, and all of a sudden, one of their teammates is gone.
In team sport, the whole thing is the weakest link does break the chain, and in this case, Sally was the weakest link, and it cost them a medal, probably.
I hope she does get another chance, and I hope she gets through it.
I did feel very sorry for Sally Robbins, but I felt more sorry for her teammates.
We're not punching each other, and we're not fighting, and we're not screaming at each other.
But they did come to blows. Only a few weeks later, Katrina Oliver was suspended from rowing for 2 years for slapping Sally Robbins.
Come on, girls, 2008.
Lying down on the job? Nope, never a good idea, Sally. Let's move on to number 17.
What I said, is that Daniel? This is Tony Abbott. And then eventually Daniel just says, what I want to say to you is thanks for having me.
In February 2005, the hard man of federal politics, Tony Abbott, was the centre of media frenzy when the son he never knew was found and then lost again.
Tony Abbott was confronted with the allegation that he had a son in what used to be called out of wedlock.
What a terrible story to have to play out in the public eye, and I think they managed it as best they could.
All sorts of things happen when people are young and hot-blooded.
We were trying not to be sexual. That was the year Tony was thinking about entering the priesthood. We were playing Vatican roulette. We were intimate. We were just using withdrawal.
ABC sound recordist Daniel O'Connor was shocked to discover that his real dad was the health minister, Tony Abbott.
Got off the phone and wandered around the house swearing for a while. The strangeness of it all is that he'd been as close to me as putting an earpiece in my waxy ear.
It was soap opera, except it was real life.
And he instantly claimed the boy and did all the right things, only to discover some months later that the young fella wasn't his son after all.
It was a very private thing that became a very public thing, and I think it was very sad for people.
I spoke to Daniel this morning, and he said, you're still my mum, but Tony's not still his dad.
You just wonder how on earth how on earth that mistake could have been made, you know, and how on earth it became so public when clearly, you know, there was another fox in the hen house.
Meanwhile, Workplace Relations Minister Peter Reith had no trouble finding his son. He was just a phone call away.
Peter Reith's son had been using the old man's taxpayer-funded telephone card, not just to ring up Auntie Mavis around the corner, but to make something like $50,000 worth of telephone calls all around the world. And when Mr. Reith was told about it, the blame game started.
I admitted that I made one mistake.
The Australian people want three things from Peter Reith.
Thank you very much. Where is the car?
The truth, the whole truth.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's fine.
And nothing but the truth.
How do you rack up 50 grand on a phone? I mean, he's got to be ringing the sex lines, hasn't he?
Look, you can always get me by calling through on the Prime Minister's private line. But just reverse the charges. Call me back later. Let's have a look at what's coming up after the break.
My mouth just fell open.
What?
I just was completely outraged.
I thought Dicko was way out of line.
That would have been very traumatic for her.
Probably one of the most remarkable dummy spits in the history of Australia, actually.
And when you decide you're going to play in the jungle, you have to play by the jungle rules.
And here we had two Soviet spies who we discovered were in our midst.
Welcome back to 20 to 1 Aussie Scandals, where we're counting down the stories that shocked us all. At number 16 is some fashion advice that outraged the nation. Paulini Karunavuli's beautiful voice came to national attention on 2003's Australian Idol.
Never failed to sing brilliantly, but whoever convinced you to wear that, I wouldn't listen to him again.
But it was her body shape that put her in the headlines. Judge Ian Dixon's comments created a frenzy.
You should choose more appropriate clothes or shed some pounds. I'm sorry.
I remember watching that night and my mouth just fell open when he said those words. I just was completely outraged.
You know, young women who are destroying their bodies because, you know, they don't want to risk ridicule. I mean, that's rough.
You should choose more appropriate clothes or shed some pounds. I'm sorry.
I thought Dicko was way out of line.
Dicko says what he thinks every time, you know what I mean?
I think there's a time and a place for a comment like that, and certainly not in the eyes of the nation. That would have been very traumatic for her.
Yeah, I was really shocked, and I'm glad Australia was too.
You know, we didn't realise that it was such a big thing until we started hearing, like, the media go, like, crazy about it.
I was on her side, you know. It's whether you can sing or not. It's what's coming from inside of you. Look, you know, we never sort of dressed too well, and it didn't matter.
What's with what you're wearing, girl?
Oh, these days you can't say it's about sound, I guess, is the argument, that it's the whole package or it's nothing. Look at Meatloaf, arm bag.
The point should be, what is with what you're wearing?
But I have to admit, gold lycra, not flattering.
You know, looking back on it, I feel like I should have thought about it a bit more. He did say he was sorry, and I said I was going to punch him in the head, but yeah, no, we kind of sorted things out.
At 15 is Mark Latham, the one-time saviour of the Australian Labor Party and would-be Prime Minister. But when the electorate rejected him, he didn't just take his bat and go home. Instead, with a pen dipped in poison, he wrote a diary full of vicious, spiteful attacks on long-time enemies and on one-time friends.
I'm not handing out how to votes, some polling booth.
You have absolutely disemboweled the Labor Party in this book.
Well, I've put down a frank record of how I saw things, and I don't think there's a problem with that.
Probably one of the most remarkable dummy spits in the history of Australia, actually.
If there were gold medals for biting the hand that feeds you, Mark Latham would be standing on top of the dais.
There is no real camaraderie in politics. All this hubbub about marching in front of the cameras, being a team, solidarity, is about that thing.
If you'd have written a brief for him,
how to destroy myself and the party. He just followed the script, page after page.
You want to talk about standards, do you?
To talk about a man who was the leader of a political party and puts out in a book this shit can of a party that I sit on. What?
And when you decide you're going to play in the jungle, you have to play by the jungle rules. And, you know, if you can't stand the heat, you shouldn't be there.
We all know the story about the leopard doesn't change its spots. I just wondered, I mean, the Labor Party knew what they were getting. He was their Exocet missile. They used to point him and shoot him.
And every home buyer in this nation is saying you're the biggest C they've seen in a long, long time.
And I don't understand how they thought that suddenly that was all going to go away and they were going to make a mild-mannered statesman out of him.
How are you, Mark? Good. How are you? I'm very well. Good to see you. You too. Okay. Good luck. I'm happily a home dad.
Mark,
I retired
you can't
from
say this, Mark.
in January.
You just dropped a dirty bomb on the Labor Party.
I'm
you
here
can't
talking
say
about
I
my
didn't
diaries.
do nothing.
I'm not here. Well, I'm having my say, and I'm proud to put my name to it.
Well, we always won on as politicians, and maybe we got one.
And look at the result. It's really superb.
At 14, the world's first hand transplant caused headlines for the wrong reasons, when the patient, convicted fraudster Clint Hallam, turned his back on medical advice and threw away the opportunity he'd been handed.
I wonder if he was only in it so he could maybe get a new set of fingerprints.
What if in his previous life he'd been a pickpocket?
I thought that'd be a bloke's dream come true, to have a hand that belonged to somebody else, and they wouldn't have to use their imaginations.
Hallam lost his hand in an accident while serving time in prison for fraud.
All doctors want to get their patients back to the profession they had before they got damaged. And unfortunately, by putting an arm on him, he became a better con man.
The operation was an initial success, but the surgeon's elation turned to anger and regret when the patient walked away from his post-op care for a lucrative US media tour.
About a month after the transplant was done, and he said, it's just amazing, everything's starting to work. And he said, look at my thumb. And you could see the thumb moving. And unfortunately, the cameras didn't go round the other side, but it was absolutely obvious. It never worked. It never was going to work.
2 years after the operation, his body rejected the new hand, and the surgeons were forced to remove it.
And when he said that it started to rot, that was just too much for me.
It wasn't that his body rejected the hand rejected him.
It is the first sample of totalitarian methods we've come face to face with in our own country, and no Australian likes it.
At 13, it was a classic spy story on Australian soil.
This was at the coldest part of the Cold War to date.
And here we had two Soviet spies who we discovered were in our midst. Gee, this is the movies come true.
Vladimir Petrov and his wife Evdokia were members of the Soviet embassy in Canberra and high-ranking Russian spies.
Why were they spying here? Why were they operating here? Were they trying to undermine our democracy? Were they planning a revolution? All these thoughts were going through people's hearts and minds.
Where Australia was astonished to find itself in the middle of sort of Cold War affairs.
You had this fear of Reds under the bed, so, you know, communism moving down from Soviet Russia, and eventually we'd all be taken over.
When Vladimir defected to Australia in return for information on communist spies in this country, 2 Soviet agents tried to take Mrs. Petrov back to Russia.
Mrs. Petrov is saying something in Russian, which was later interpreted as "I don't want to go." But Mrs. Petrov, up to this point, has not sought asylum in Australia.
The tarmac filled with groups of people who were deeply concerned that this woman was being dragged off to the Soviet Union to some sort of terrible punishment. They did their level best to prevent the plane taking off.
The crowd surges forward, with men and women endeavoring to snatch Mrs. Petrov from her guards. She looks back for one instant as if beseeching help and is then forced further up the gangway.
There were the Russian agents trying to get Mrs. Petrov on the plane. And here we are in Australia, nice, God-fearing, loving people, and somehow this was a rare visitation from another world of this sort of heavyweight nastiness.
Before she can enter the plane, however, the crowd pulls the gangway from the aircraft.
Why did the Russians want her back in Moscow so badly? Was it simply to punish her husband, who they couldn't get their hands on? Or did she hold more secrets that the Russians were desperately trying to protect?
After a struggle, police and security men get the stairway back to the Constellation, and Mrs. Petrov goes aboard.
The plane flew to Darwin, where Australian police boarded the aircraft, and Mrs. Petroff chose to defect. The Petroffs lived the rest of their lives in Australia under the names Sven and Maria Allison. Coming up on 20 to 1 Aussie Scandals.
I can reveal right now, it was Warnie.
Everything else gets pointed at Warnie, so I don't know why we won't throw that at him.
To leave out the fact that she was having a serious relationship.
Bad idea, really bad idea.
Once you tell the first lie, you've got to keep going.
Especially if you do it wrong and get caught.
Welcome back to 20 to 1 Aussie Scandals, where tonight we're looking back at the events that had the nation talking. Let's take a look at what's made the countdown so far. At 20, the Paxton family wanted a job, but not that much. At 19, 4 inches of flesh that wowed the wowzers. At 18, an elite athlete who didn't want to row her boat. At 17, it's Tony Abbotton's son. At 16, a weighty issue for a young idol. At 15, Latham leaves his mark. At 14, you have to hand it to Clint Hallam. And at 13, the spies who loved us. Now, moving on to number 12, a cricketing scandal and a case of mistaken identity. Or was it? In 1999, Queensland fast bowler Scott Muller was playing in only his second test for his country. However, it wasn't his below-par performance that caused headlines, but 7 words caught on a Channel 9 microphone.
Can't bowl, can't throw. Certainly the can't bowl, can't throw line was a huge controversy at the time.
I think it was made a scandal because Scott Muller kept wanting to make something of it.
Scott Muller was convinced that his own teammate, Shane Warne, had sledged him.
Can't bowl, can't throw.
Did you say Scott Muller can't bowl or can't throw?
Well, no, I didn't, Mike, and it has disappointed me a little bit that the innuendo and everyone's sort of suggesting but not really coming out and saying that I said it.
Shane Warne tried to ring him a couple of times and tell him it wasn't me who said it, and he just hung up in Warnie's ear, and in the end, Warnie got sick of bothering, and I don't blame him.
Can't bowl, can't throw.
Can't bowl, can't throw. I can reveal right now, it was Warnie.
Everything else gets pointed at Warnie, so I don't know why we won't throw that at him.
Nash, I'm only joking. It was Joe the cameraman.
Channel 9 cameraman Joe Prefatira came forward and admitted that he made the remark about Scott Muller.
Joe, did you say that Scott Muller can't bowl, can't throw?
Unfortunately, Mike, yes, I did say it. I did say it.
Don't ask Warnie, it was cameraman Joe. Say you can't bowl and you can't throw.
There are still people who think it was Shane Warne and that Joe took a dive for him.
Strikes me that Joe the cameraman is in fact Joe the patsy.
Because it sounded like the sort of thing Warne would say.
The tests we've done on the tapes show that it certainly wasn't Shane Warne.
And for people to not believe that and go into it and think it's a cover-up, it really, you know, it's just from outer space or something.
Joe says he said it. Joe said it. And Scott Muller should stop his bloody whinging and be thankful that he played 2 test matches for Australia.
It just goes to show you can't trust a cameraman. Sorry, Joe. Only joking. Let's move on to number 11. At 11 is a romantic affair that became a political scandal. In 1997, the leader of the Australian Democrats, Cheryl Kernot, caused a storm when she defected to the Australian Labor Party.
Listen, do you want to know a secret?
No, there is no big, deep, dark secret.
Do you promise not to tell?
But there is a big secret. A leaked email confirms that when Gareth Evans, then Deputy Leader to Kim Beazley, brought Miss Kernot into the Labor fold in late 1997, they'd been having an affair for several years.
Channel 9 political editor Laurie Oakes revealed the affair when Cheryl Kernot failed to mention it in her autobiography in 2002.
I always wondered why Laurie Oakes felt he had to bring the affair up at all.
This steamy affair was crucial to what happened to her, crucial to her behaviour, crucial to her lapses of judgment.
To leave out the fact that she was having a serious relationship with the man who took her politically from Democrats to Labor, to leave that fact out was not the right thing. I think it was probably what Laurie Oakes did there was legitimate.
I know you're doing a job, but it's this kind of thing that makes people really get sick and tired of your intrusion into our lives.
We're privy to all sorts of secrets that we don't reveal to other people. I don't know that there was much to be gained out of that, and I felt very sorry for Cheryl Curnow, I have to say.
At number 10, it's the strange case of Gold Coast entertainer Fairly Arrow. Now you see her, now you don't.
Is Fairly alive or is she dead? I believe she's still alive.
The driver's door of her car was open, as was the front door of the house, with the keys still in the lock.
Fairly Arrow disappeared in 1991 after making several complaints to the police that she was the target of a stalker. But 2 days later, she turned up unharmed.
He didn't hurt me. He just tied me up on a bed and just sat there.
Once you tell the first lie, you've got to keep going.
I've got no idea who it was. I was blindfolded the majority of the time.
And on and on and on it went.
But he'd leave every once in a while, and I didn't know what he was doing when he'd go.
It soon became fairly clear to the police that Fairly's story was fairly average, and that she'd staged her own kidnapping as a publicity stunt.
Poor old Fairly Arrow staged her own disappearance. You know, if only she'd waited a couple of years, nature would have taken its own course.
Bad idea, really bad idea. Especially if you do it wrong and get caught.
I just want to say that I'm sorry for all the trouble that's been caused over the past 4 months.
Fairly was convicted of making a false complaint to police and ordered to pay more than $20,000 in fines and costs.
This is saying in showbiz you couldn't get arrested, you know. That was the only way she could.
Yeah, well, inevitably you go on and do Penthouse or something, and plenty of Australians found her in the end.
They're non-explicit shots. Well, they're very elegant shots, and I've logically got to do it because I can hardly go to a bank and get $23.5 grand to pay back the government.
What on earth did she get out of it? When you really think of it, I mean, where is she now?
Fairly Arrow is a nationally certified martial arts instructor and fitness expert.
And almost anyone can do it.
So in order to get noticed, Fairly disappeared. All she really needed to do was get a good agent. Coming up on 20 to 1 Aussie Scandals.
To see those shoulders, which were bigger than men.
I'm sitting there going, what is going on here?
How did anybody think they were going to get away with that?
People gave money to him and to his companies, only to find that they were being ripped off.
I mean, he was a rat. There's no risk on that.
It was all a bit dodgy.
I think that there was a fair bit of hysteria about that. The mood was one of total shock.
I guess he had the last laugh by dying, didn't he?
Welcome back to 20 to 1 Aussie Scandals as we count down the stories that had Australia talking. At number 9, the shocking poolside image that had Aussie swimmers and public crying foul. At the World Swimming Championships in Perth in 1998, the world was shocked by the broad shoulders and bulging muscles of Chinese swimmer Li Jinyi. Her physique sparked accusations of steroid use.
To see those shoulders, which were bigger than men's. I mean, you expect men to have shoulders like that.
I think that there was a fair bit of hysteria about that. I think she just had a particularly well-cut swimsuit.
You know, I had shoulders like that in the 80s. Mine were shoulder pads. I had shoulders that you could land aircraft on.
I think she lifted herself out of the pool one-handed, and she came out and this massive thing that got out of the pool, and I'm sitting there going, what is going on here?
I think her chest expansion was about a 41. My dad was a 41 expansion in chest.
I think she was the only one of the squad that could give a urine sample standing up from an adjoining suburb.
On the way to the championships, breaststroker Yuan Yuan was caught at Sydney Airport with enough undetectable human growth hormone to supply the entire team. She and the team coach were sent packing in disgrace.
If that coach has implemented a drugs regime for one of his swimmers,
then it's reasonable to assume that it's happening for all 5 of his swimmers which are in Perth.
How did anybody think they were going to get away with that? Drugs in sport are such a blight anyway, but to just rub it in people's face and sort of say, no, they just, they just trained hard. Please.
Considering as well that they hadn't dominated in the sport in the past, I think that there was reasons why there was questions about it.
In the 1990s alone, 38 Chinese swimmers and coaches were suspended for drug violations. That's half of all drug suspensions ever. I don't know what all the fuss was about. I thought he was a fine figure of a man. At 8 is one of the high flyers of the greed is good generation, Christopher Skase.
People liked him. People gave money to him and to his companies, only to find that they were being ripped off because he got out of the country with hundreds of millions of dollars.
I mean, he was a rat. There's no risk on that, and he should have been tracked down and brought to justice.
So you're not on the run?
Absolutely not.
The chase for Skase kept the media busy for years.
Enough is enough.
Christopher denied having any of the loot, but at least he had his health. Or did he?
I did an investigation for a current affair with his former assistant, who actually proved with his diary that at one stage when he was feigning his illness, that he had actually flown from Mallorca to London and back.
Skase fought extradition to Australia on the grounds of ill health, while swimming laps of the pool at his Mallorca mansion.
Yes, unfortunately, I've contracted the disease emphysema in both lungs.
You know, we didn't believe him because he didn't have very good cred.
Christopher Skase, in my mind, was sort of in the same category as Michael Jackson, who wore that thing over his face. You just sort of never knew, but it was all a bit dodgy.
But everyone, I think, was thinking he was faking it with the old mask on and the wheelchair, and then all of a sudden he died. Everyone, oh, he must have been sick.
Gee, hope I wasn't out of line with that whole malingering con man thing.
I guess he had the last laugh by dying, didn't he? And then I felt a little guilty.
One of the problems with emphysema is that it's directly affected by stress.
Well, yeah, that should be written on Christopher Skase's gravestone. See, I told you I was sick.
At number 7 is a disappearance that made international headlines. On a stormy day in late 1967, Australia was shocked by the mysterious disappearance of the Prime Minister and the bizarre rumours that followed. What did happen the day Harold Holt went swimming at Cheviot Beach, south of Melbourne?
Harold Holt was a very good swimmer, went into this boiling surf at Portsea and vanished.
But I'll never forget the sound of the helicopters going. They must have had every helicopter they could muster going down to Portsea to look for him.
The mood was one of total shock, because he was a very good Prime Minister.
I mean, you do not lose heads of government like that, except we did. We lost a Prime Minister in a pretty Australian way. He'd gone for a swim.
Well, Harold would drive down in his own car. No security, no telephone, for the weekend.
The public was falsely led to believe that Harold Holt was with just one other person on the beach that day. In fact, the PM was in the company of several young women, including his alleged lover.
But it didn't go on for long because this colossal boiling mass of water came and then there was nothing.
And the theory started to come in that no one could believe that the man actually simply went into the water for a swim and drowned.
He'd been taken by the Chinese in a sub.
What for? Why would you want a Harold Holt in Peking?
Taken by a shark, possibly. He was out in the white Pointer country. He was dressed like a seal. He had the black fins on, the black wetsuit. You know, the shark's going, look at this, it's a 6-foot seal and I might have that for lunch.
I think the poor bugger simply drowned.
I wonder if John Howard feels like a swim.
Coming up on 20 to 1 Aussie Scandals.
I mean, I knew as a journalist it was a great story.
I thought it was very sleazy, actually.
I was pleased to know someone was having sex.
It caused ructions.
Doesn't say in the rules we can't do this, so we're bloody well going to do it and cop that.
Police could have saved most of the 32 people killed in a US college massacre if they had locked down the Virginia campus after an initial double murder in a dormitory. The gunman, who killed himself, is believed to be from China. The widow of Merson Dunstan, the 5th victim of Victoria's Broughton Hall gastro crisis, The management of the facility must accept some blame for his death. 5 Sydney teenagers accused of a gang rape have been freed on bail, with prosecutors admitting new evidence weakens their case. And Richard Gere is the object of hatred in India after a dramatic embrace with a Bollywood star. More news at 9.
Welcome back to 20 to 1 as we continue counting down some of Australia's most memorable scandals. At number 6, how an Englishman in deep water cost Australia a fortune.
Here was a man trapped in an upturned racing yacht thousands of kilometres south of Australia in the middle of the roaring 40s. An Australian warship was sent south to rescue him.
Tony Bullamore's yacht capsized in the Southern Ocean between Antarctica and Australia during a solo round-the-world race in 1997.
From my perspective, an amazing case study of human survival under extreme conditions, cold, dark, and terrifying.
Boy, when I saw this ship standing there and the plane going over the top, it was heaven.
We all loved the story, but then many of us had second thoughts when we got the bill.
Tony always had an eye for a quid, and right from the moment he stepped ashore, he sold his story to international television, he sold his story to magazines and so forth, and left the Australian taxpayer with a bill from memory of about $8 million for the rescue.
That's my dough. I helped you with the rescue, and now you've lined your pockets. Give it back.
Tony Bullamore's life was at stake. If no one had gone and rescued him, he would have died. He would have paid the ultimate price for the spirit of adventure.
Well, the reality is that Tony never has enough money to pay his bills. So it was always hard for him to, move the cash flow around.
It would have been very nice if he'd have used some of the money to take all the sailors on board HMAS Adelaide, if he'd have taken them all out for a dinner and a drink.
At number 5, an unusual sex scandal. The lovers were married to each other. The scandal wasn't so much that Federal Sports Minister John Brown had sex with his wife Jan Murray, but where they had it.
I did seduce him on his desk the first day that he was in his new office as a minister, and I suppose it was a bit of vindictiveness that I left the undies in his permanent head's ashtray.
I mean, I knew as a journalist it was a great story. I said to her, look, that's a lovely story. It's typically Australian, it's irreverent, it shows that you and John were very much in love with each other and that you were snubbing your nose at the establishment. Great story.
I thought it was very sleazy, actually.
I was pleased to know someone was having sex. I was pleased to know they were having fun. I was pleased to know they had a life. Sex
on the desk, on the ministerial desk. Taxpayer-funded sex, you'd so to speak, wasn't it?
We expect a little more, we should expect a little more from people in public life.
When does a wife talking about having sex with her husband become a big story? When he's a Minister of the Crown and you have sex on his desk in Parliament House, I guess.
Why did you do that?
Oh, just to show them that it was a new order, that there were real people here, humans with feelings, with passion.
I think they had some kids at the time and they would have been sitting at home watching 60 Minutes going, Mum, are you serious?
We were all visualising it, I never want that to happen with John and Jeanette.
Would you ever condone such behaviour or engage in such behaviour yourself?
Come on.
I was sorry when they broke up. It seemed like they had all the elements to go the distance.
At number 4, a classic tale of fierce rivals with a take-no-prisoners attitude.
Don Bradman, the possessor of more records than a gramophone company.
Back in 1932, the English cricket establishment decided there was only one way to stop Don Bradman: bodyline.
But one ball kicks up suddenly and caught him over the heart.
The Englishman intimidated the Aussies by bowling directly at the batsman's body.
Bodyline, for a start, was perfectly legal. No problem about that. It caused ructions.
In the 30s, it was a big scandal, bodyline. I think these days people would accept it as part of the tactics of the game.
The significance of Bodyline was it was the first time you went from the spirit of the rules to the rules. It doesn't say in the rules we can't do this, so we're bloody well going to do it and cop that.
Fast ball caught him on the temple and he staggers away from the wicket.
You've got a little missile coming at you at a speed of about 80 to 90 miles an hour, and it was a very, very dangerous thing. We were seriously thinking there might be a riot of some kind because the crowds were very upset at the injuries to the players.
That was rather a nasty one, and it made the plucky Woodville feel rather sick for the moment.
The people in the stands thought the English gentlemen were destroying the gentleman's game.
Well, anybody who refers to cricket as a gentleman's game is either a fool or doesn't know the history of the game of cricket.
I think Douglas Jardine, the captain at the time for England, did a wonderful thing for his country. He saw an opportunity to get Bradman out in particular, kept his average down to 56 and won the series, so you got to take your hat off to him.
There's two teams out there and only one of them is playing cricket, and it was bloody well us, and it wasn't those mongrels that were hurling missiles at our head.
After the break, we reveal our top 3 Aussie scandals. Welcome back to 20 to 1 Aussie Scandals. The stories that had us arguing around the water cooler, even before there were water coolers. And tonight, Dawn Fraser comes in 3rd place, something she rarely did in the pool. At the 1964 Olympic Games in Tokyo, Australia's greatest female swimmer and chief larrikin, Dawn Fraser, drew the anger of team management when she was caught souveniring a flag near Emperor Hirohito's palace.
And we'd had a few drinks in my room, and you know, one thing led to another. We had saying there's a few flags out there, what can we do? And we go and souvenir a couple of flags.
The word has it that she'd downed 3 long necks before she actually went on that adventure.
The avenue leading up toward the Imperial Palace had all these Olympic flags.
She's a sort of a larrikin in the most complimentary way, Australian.
And just as we were getting the 3rd one down, we heard these whistles, and they were the police.
I got the feeling they were going to get Dawn Fraser on something, one way or the other, because she was a free spirit.
The officials did get Dawn. She was banned from swimming, but contrary to the myth, not for stealing the flag.
Supposedly I was banned for stealing the flag in Tokyo, but the case was I got banned for marching in the opening ceremony, and I wore an unofficial swimsuit in a heat because my swimsuit didn't fit me.
The march obviously didn't affect her swimming, as she became the first person, man or woman, ever to win the same title at 3 successive Olympics.
The penalty that they gave her was just absolutely totally stupid and over the top, and effectively ended her career.
Dawn wrote an apology for pinching the flag, and the Japanese forgave her.
When it all became known, the Japanese emperor gave Dawn Fraser the flag with his best wishes, which says a great deal about Japanese emperors and not very much about Australian swimming officials.
Dawn carried the flag leading the Australian team in the closing ceremony.
And as I walked by the emperor, I was to dip the flag, and as I walked by, he stood up and went like that to me, and I went like that back to him.
At number 2, the biggest scandal in Australian horse racing history had all the ingredients of a juicy crime thriller, but started out as a farce.
Fine Cotton's going to hold on, I think. Oh, he's just in front. Oh, he may have won by a nose.
When Fine Cotton put its nose in front at Brisbane's Eagle Farm in 1984, it soon became apparent that horses had been switched. Hello, I'm Fine Cotton. Of course it's a horse, but which horse?
A horse is a horse, of course, and no one can talk to a horse, of course.
A much faster nag called Bold Personality ran in Fine Cotton's place, complete with badly painted white socks to look more like the real Fine Cotton. So the police were called in.
You know, Fine Cotton and Bold Personality, the two horses, the fact that they painted the horse.
I don't know why no one ever picked up it was fake. It had tan lines, this horse.
At the time, it must have been a really good idea, but it went so wrong.
They probably would have got away with it, except the whole of Australia was riding the horse home.
Those in the know put lots of money on Fine Cotton, and the ring-in suddenly became an unlikely favourite.
An awful lot of people made an awful lot of money. An awful lot of people lost an awful lot of money.
The man on the street's putting his 50 on that horse thinking, I'm a chance here, and he never had a chance in the world.
Suddenly it went from just being almost an amateurish act of stupidity and opportunism to being something a lot more sinister.
Some of the biggest names in racing were implicated, even a Catholic priest, amid allegations of violence and death threats.
Careers were ruined. Reputations were scathed. Was it worth it in the end? Crime never pays.
Now to our number one. This one event dominated the headlines for most of a decade, dividing Australia with speculation, gossip and innuendo. But at the heart of it was a mother's worst nightmare.
I ran out of the tent. I said to Michael, the dingo's got the baby.
Lindy Chamberlain would be dead today for a crime she did not commit if the death penalty had existed in the Northern Territory.
On August 17th, 1980, baby Azaria Chamberlain disappeared from a tent at a campsite at Ayers Rock. After gathering evidence at the site, a coronial inquest confirmed her story that a dingo had taken her baby.
Lindy Chamberlain didn't behave the way most of us thought a grief-stricken mother should have behaved. She was maybe a little too cool. She was maybe a little too collected.
And if you'll notice on here, on the hands, for instance, there is blood as well. And you also must realise that the baby had lost a lot of blood.
We wanted to see a woman beside herself. She didn't present well.
Her problem was the way she looked. If she'd been blonde and cute and cried a lot, people would have said, oh, poor darling. But she looked very severe.
You know, all the appearances, superficially, she looked not like us.
If I cried, I was putting on an act for the public. If I smiled, I was heartless. You can't do anything right. And consequently, you sort of, well, I guess you freeze.
After that first inquiry, the guy from the Northern Territory, the police guy, saying, we'll get you, you bitch, after the hearing. And you think, oh, you know, that's the bigotry that we could do without in this country.
They said to me outright, if we don't get you this time, we'll get you next time, or we'll have this inquest annulled and we'll have another one until you get charged, because we're going to get you.
Lindy was charged and convicted of Azaria's murder, receiving a life sentence. She was pardoned 3 years later, but the ordeal never seemed to end.
After 3 inquests, a murder trial, 2 appeals, a royal commission, $1.3 million in compensation, 2 books and a movie, Michael and Lindy Chamberlain say their innocence has been affirmed, but they say they remain in limbo.
I felt very guilty the way I personally judged Lindy Chamberlain, Michael Chamberlain, because I went with the flow. When Azaria was taken, most Australians had judged her as being guilty, and we were just so wrong.
It was absolutely a trial by media, and a lot of those reporters in the end admitted that they were very, very wrong.
She will always divide the nation, but there are still a large number of people who think she did it.
Did you kill Azaria?
No way. I love that little girl.
But Lindy still says, and you can see the tears just start to well in her eyes when she says the words. Joyce says, you know, nobody ever asks me what it was like to lose a baby.
Let everybody see what a beautiful little girl she was. I was proud of her, and I still am proud of her.
An unforgettable event and one of the biggest stories in Australia's history. Next time on 20 to 1 Rebels and Risk Takers.
Hero or villain?
She was a ball kicker. She was such a bogan.
From those who live on the edge.
What can I do now to outrage?
Wow, temper. We loved his tanties.
To rebels with a cause.
He wore the big goggles, and I'll tell you what, he didn't back down. It held the world's attention.
We've got people with passion.
Total ass, slime ball.
To me, he's just an idiot. And I wouldn't put up with it.
Why don't you just tattoo the word rebel on your forehead?
And those who don't give a damn.
Imagine being known as the serial pest.
She's like a chameleon and a cockroach. Now that is a brave thing to do.
What was he thinking?